Hi, this is Alexis DBF with Precious Little Sleep. So quick update, today we will be talking about nap dropping from babies all the way through to the very end. As for me, I am back in Vermont, so if you've been following my exploits at all, I had a year in France, which was amazing, and COVID brought a abrupt and unpleasant end to that, which sucked, but we are home safe in Vermont, and Vermont is great, so I am happy to be here. And in case anybody is wondering, the new version of the book, the new edition will be about October 1st. And if you have a current copy and you're wondering how you can get that one free, I'll be talking more about how that can happen in like the next week or so. So that's the update. My kids are home part-time, so there is not a whole lot of time to do things I want to do, but there's no one here today. The house is all mine. It's so wild. So we're going to use this quiet time to talk about nap dropping. So a couple of themes, just kind of starting out. There were some great questions. Thank you so much if you shared questions. I will be answering hopefully most of them today. Babies are born with the highest sleep needs that you will have in your entire life, right? As a newborn, you'll be sleeping more hours a day than you ever will at any other time. And then you are decreasing fairly rapidly over the first 3 years. And that is just the way that we are built, which means you are constantly dropping naps, which means as soon as you figure out a schedule that works well for your child, it doesn't work anymore. So that's part of the challenge of just nap child sleep needs in the first 3 years. It's just, you're just coming down that slope. And it's part of life. You can't avoid it. So there's nothing we can do to prevent this. All we can do is sort of graciously navigate it as best as we can. Most nap transitions are a little wobbly. So there's a zone where you kind of don't need that nap, but you still can't quite make it long enough to get by without it. And generally you're a cranky mess. And being a cranky mess doesn't necessarily mean that it's too soon. It just means that the transition is wobbly. And it's a fact of life. It's an unpleasant time, shall we say. So when do these things happen? So newborns and younger babies have a bunch of naps. Could be 3, could be 6, it's a bunch. Typically between 6 to 9 months, most kids are on 3, moving to 2. Kids who take long naps drop sooner. Kids who take short naps are gonna be on 3 a lot longer. That's okay, it's all normal. We drop from 2 naps to 1 nap generally between 12 and 18 months. And we drop from 1 nap to no nap anywhere between age 2 and age 5, but probably on average around 3. You don't see a whole lot of kids napping at 5. You don't see a whole lot of kids dropping their nap at 2. So just consider as a general parenting guideline, and this is going to be a theme in a lot of the questions that we got today, is don't ask your children to do something that you would not reasonably do. So just think about that. If you would be unthrilled to do a thing, maybe we don't ask our kids to do a thing. The other thing I'm going to say, and I think this is really permeating all of our lives as much as we try to kind of ignore it and forget about it, is that we are sort of living in a terrible time, right? For a variety of reasons. Probably the biggest one that impacts us as parents is COVID. So we have schools closing, or we have kids at home that we're helping teach. We have daycare accessibility issues. We are working from home with children. We are trying to help our kids with their schooling. All of these things are an ever-present pressure. And so there is a really high premium put on napping because that is our time, right? Like if we don't get a break from our kids, if we're trying to help older siblings with school issues or preschool issues, and we have younger kids who are napping, that is our time. And so there's a great need for that time. So it puts a real premium on napping. And I am absolutely sympathetic to that. I get it. At the same time, kids are gonna nap or not nap as they need. And our life stress, unfortunately, does not change that. So I see a lot of parents trying to force kids to keep napping maybe longer than they need to. And again, while I'm sympathetic, you know, the trade-off may not be worth it. And we'll get more into that later. Okay, so most of the questions were about toddlers. There's just a few about younger babies. So let's just clear out the younger baby stuff and then we'll move on to most of the questions which were about toddlers. So I have a 9-month-old who is on 2 naps. They have wake times of 3 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. So they wake up at 7 in the morning, they nap from 10 to 11:15, then their second nap is from 2:15 until roughly 3-ish, and they go to bed at 7:30. Used to be 2 long naps, but now is 1 long, 1 short. Time to increase wake time. And the answer is, I don't know. Try it and see. Push the second nap later and see if it happens. It may or may not. What often is happening around 9 months is you're starting to transition to 1 nap. I know it's early, but you're heading on that path. You've got a couple more months. And it's not uncommon to have 1 long nap and 1 shorter nap. So overall, this child is sleeping 13 and a half hours a day, which is well within normal. That's a wonderful duration of sleep. So it used to be, let's say, 14 hours, which probably felt even greater, but 13 and a half hours is a super normal, awesome duration total in the day for a 9-month-old. So I can't say whether or not you can make that second long nap longer, or if it's kind of where they're at right now. But the only way to know would be to try it. Push a longer wake time and see if the second nap gets longer again. The challenge is if that second nap is later and longer, you might run into a child who's not ready to sleep at 7:30. By the way, I am open to questions live. I will say, the text on the phone is pretty tiny. So we'll try. Okay. How should we know when we go from 2 naps to 1 nap? My 10-month-old is crying for almost 30 minutes in the crib, but falling asleep, and they already have a really long wake time. But if I extend the wake time even longer, they're super cranky and really worked up, and then it's even harder to fall asleep. So is it possible for a 10-month-old to be moving to 1 nap? It is possible. Typically, kids who move to 1 nap earlier have long naps and often tend to have longer than average nights. Now, this person did not put their whole schedule in, so I don't know that to be true. But if you have a kid who sleeps 11 and a half, 12 hours at night, they're going to be less sleepy during the day and possibly transition to 1 nap sooner than is average. So the answer is it depends. Maybe, possibly. I think 30 minutes is a lot of crying. It might be worth a shot to move to 1 nap and see how that goes. Navigating the drop from this itty bitty baby taking 4 to 5 naps and sleeping all day to 3 solid naps is a mystery to me. I feel like 4 naps with 2-hour wake windows is still working, but I also feel like I'm fighting this internal clock that predictably gets super sleepy and grumpy at certain times and wants 3 naps. I have no idea what I'm doing. I hear you. Me too. So I don't know how old this child is, but there is not an internal clock for naps, truly. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of literature, other books, not naming names, about having a schedule and sticking to the schedule and making a commitment to the schedule. And that's largely bunk. There's not a whole lot of benefit to having a super rigid, consistent nap schedule. I mean, it makes our lives easier, right? Because nap math is exhausting. But there's no major reason why you have to do it that way. So there's not an internal clock driving things. So if they're getting super sleepy and grumpy at certain times of the day, it could be that they're ready for a nap. I don't know that moving to 3 naps solves that issue. So it sounds like you're doing a great job in kind of following baby's lead, and baby is where they are, which is currently on 4 naps. To cap or not to cap? That is a question. So that could be a whole Facebook Live all on its own. People love capping naps. It is like the cool thing to do. We are nap cappers. Honestly, I am not a big nap capper. When I work one-on-one with families, I almost never recommend it. The only times I recommend capping nap is when we are seeing unambiguous evidence that it is negatively impacting night sleep, right? So that's really the only time I'm a big fan of capping naps. Sometimes when you are transitioning from 3 naps to 2 naps or 2 naps to 1 nap, sometimes there are cases where capping naps kind of helps bridge the gap. They can't take 2 full naps, but they can't quite make it to 1 nap. So if we have 1 little cat nap in the afternoon, it kind of helps bridge the day. Sometimes that's true. In rare occasions, you'll have kids who, for whatever reason, are mega nappers, and they will take 2 and 3 hour naps, and then they'll be up until midnight. And then, we want to cap naps. But in general, I want a child to show me that they need those naps capped, that it has to happen. Otherwise, I'm sort of like, yeah, do your thing, buddy. Have at it. All right. So most of the questions are about toddlers, big kids, anybody from 2 to 5. So let's dig into that. I have a daughter, 11 months old. About a month ago, she transitioned to one nap only. She wakes up at 8 a.m. She naps from 12:30 to 2 and goes to sleep around 8 p.m. Is that okay? That sounds great to me. She's sleeping 12 hours at night. Fantastic, right? 8 to 8, huzzah. And then she takes an hour-and-a-half nap. So she's sleeping 13 and a half hours a day, which, as we just discussed, is a totally reasonable sleep duration for a 10-month-old. 11-month-old. Well, same thing. So great. Sounds good to me. My 2-year-old is fighting naps, but clearly still needs at least a short one to make it to bedtime. Some days he won't, and we get a total meltdown. The overtiredness makes bedtime misery. What do? Earlier bedtime, different nap strategy. We're trying to alternate days, and it's only sort of working. So, 2-year-olds are our party. And I mean that seriously. I actually love toddlers. They are super fun. They also have their own agenda, which may not be your agenda. You cannot make a 2-year-old nap. There is no magic pill to make a 2-year-old nap. So if we put them down at nap time and they don't, we don't have a lot of good options. I mean, we can go drive around for an hour, they'll probably fall asleep, but from a practical perspective on a day-to-day basis, we don't have a lot of good options. So I would say definitely we want to keep offering quiet time for an hour, and hopefully they nap most of the time. It is not impossible that they're done napping, but it's improbable. So, and then when they don't take a nap, they are a mess. So this is a conundrum at all ages. This is the wobbly zone, right? That maybe we're not done with naps here, but this is a common theme in a lot of the questions. They fight nap or they won't nap, but when they don't nap, the afternoon is just a disaster. They're falling asleep in their dinner chair. Bedtime is like just a huge meltdown, and it sucks. And I get it. But here's the thing. Bigger kids, we cannot force them to sleep. We cannot make them sleep if they won't. And it sucks when that happens. It is typically relatively temporary, but temporary could be anything from a week to 6 weeks. And I know 6 weeks does not feel like temporary when your beloved child is just flailing, melting down all afternoon. Every little thing is tears and upsets and temper tantrums. What can we do? Well, again, not what you want to hear, but accept that we cannot make nap happen, but we continue to offer an hour of quiet time in a calm, dark, boring, comfortable space where sleep is possible. Make sure that nap that we're offering our quiet time at an age-appropriate time. So for example, if you're like that lucky parent whose child sleeps till 8 a.m., that's a late morning, so nap's gonna have to be later. That's a child who wouldn't be ready for a nap typically around noon, so we might have to have nap be as late as 2, right? 2 to 3 is our nap time / quiet time, and then they go to bed at 8 or 9. So make sure we're aiming at the right time so there's a chance of them sleeping. We want them to be tired. And let's also consider the fact that we're gonna have to do a lot of distraction and outside time, and it's exhausting and it's temporary. Do we move bedtime up earlier in that scenario? Yes, but cautiously. So here's a common dilemma that I saw a lot of these questions where they go, well, my child was sleeping, hypothetically, 7 to 6, 7 p.m., 6 a.m., and they just dropped a nap, and they're a mess in the afternoon, and evening is a misery. So they used to nap an hour and a half a day, so let's move bedtime up an hour and a half to make up for the lost sleep. So instead of going to bed at 7, we're gonna put them down at 5:36. So when your child drops a nap, it doesn't mean that you just get to move it to bedtime. It doesn't mean like there's 2 jars of jelly beans, and since this jar is empty, now we just move extra jelly beans into the other jar. It is a sign that they are outgrowing the need for that much sleep. So do we slide bedtime up? Yes, probably. But think about this in small increments, like a half an hour. Because when we start shifting bedtime up dramatically earlier, a couple of things happen. So here's my warning about nap dropping leading to crazy early bedtimes. One is, we as mammals are wired not to sleep in the hours prior to our biological bedtime. We are wired to not sleep. It is called the dead zone for sleep, and this is a well-documented phenomenon. So it's not just humans, it's all mammals. So when we move bedtime earlier, we are moving directly into the dead zone for sleep. So that is a setup for big bedtime battles, even from a child who is melting down, exhausted, awful all afternoon. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is the jelly bean issue. We don't get to just move from one jar to the other. So dropping nap doesn't just mean you take whatever the nap was and append it to night. It typically is a sign that they need less sleep. So if we ask a child to sleep more at night than they are biologically capable of, what happens is bedtime battles, early wakings, night gaps, all bad things, right? Nobody wants these things. And the third issue is if we move bedtime really, really early, like 6, what happens is a kid who was waking up at 6 in the morning is now waking up at 5 or 4:30, and the vicious cycle begins, because when you start the day at 4:30, then you can't make it to bedtime and you're melting down, and so it becomes this cyclical, overtired, messy issue. So, and nobody wants to get up at 4:30 in the morning. Nobody wants to be up at 4:30 in the morning. So when napping ends, it's a sad time, and there's going to be some wobbly time where kid is not a party to hang out with in the afternoon. Maybe think about a half an hour early bedtime, but don't go nuts. Don't go super crazy. Okay. Another question. My 2.5-year-old sometimes naps and sometimes hangs out for quiet time for an hour instead. Often if we're out with family adventure, she doesn't nap. On days when she doesn't nap, when is bedtime? If we bring bedtime earlier, how much earlier? Bedtime is normally 9. Can we realistically alternate between nap and no nap days? Or is this a disaster for consistency? On no nap days, there are epic meltdowns when we shift to have bedtime at 8 p.m. Should we shift even earlier? Great, we just covered this. So, naps are not tattoos. You are allowed to go from one to the other. There are kids who, in the process of nap dropping, do it one way one day and one way the other day, and they alternate for a while, and that's okay. There is no need to commit to either one nap, no nap, 2 naps. You can be a little flexible and kind of go with what's happening that day. So we just discussed this, right? So normal bedtime is 9 o'clock. On no nap days, they're putting her down at 8 with epic meltdowns, which we just discussed why. The dead zone for sleep. So as frustrating as it is, you don't get to shift bedtime like dramatically earlier on no nap days, half an hour maybe, because our biology says you fall asleep at the same time every day. We're not good at shifting our bedtimes back and forth. That's jet lag, right? That's daylight savings time. That crummy feeling you get on daylight saving time, that's what we're doing when we move bedtime back and forth. So maybe a half an hour earlier to avoid the daylight saving body shift weirdness and the dead zone for sleep. And yes, it's okay to be inconsistent and have naps someday and not other days. When do you know it's time to drop a nap? When they fight it or just roll around during their nap time? I have a roller arounder. He doesn't fight us, just takes forever to fall asleep. So I'm hoping I can continue to put him down for a nap, even if it takes him a half an hour to 45 minutes. He'll be 3 at the end of October. So I'll be honest, for older kids, again, pandemic, everyone dying, nobody has free time, and we're all trying to do 400,000 things while stuck at home. It is a hard time. So having a child roll around happily for a half an hour and then take a nap buys you a little more time, gives you a little more breathing room, fine. I would be nervous if it took more than 30 minutes. I think 30 minutes is the maximum amount of time I would ask a toddler to entertain themselves in a dark, boring room. This gets back to the rule of don't ask a child to do something you wouldn't do. And I know you say, well, I would love to lie down in a dark, quiet room, but you wouldn't really if it was an everyday thing. Like the charm would wear off pretty quickly. So 30 minutes of happily rolling around and then taking a nap is fine. If it starts to get longer, we need to consider either moving nap later, which can cause bedtime problems, may not be a good trade-off, or shortening nights so that they're more ready to fall asleep readily at nap time, or some balance in there that works. But 30 minutes of rolling around is fine. It's when it gets to be like at 45 minutes to an hour that I really feel like we're setting our kids up to resent nap time, because nobody wants to do that for, that's a long time to just, and I know some kids will do it and they'll say, well, my kid's happy. I'm like, yes, but long-term it leads to a lot of nap battles and not enjoying nap time and quiet time. And ironically, spending large amounts of time not sleeping in your bed can actually create "this is where I don't sleep" associations, which is the last thing we want to do. Okay, 17-month-old still takes 2 naps some days. If she wakes early, she can't make it, and we do 2. Sometimes 1, sometimes 2. Ugh, this is the worst. But again, Naps are not tattoos, right? You can be flexible and have like one day be 2 naps and one day be 1 nap, and that's okay. Okay. Oh, here we go. Sorry, this question. I have a 14-month-old who sleeps 9 p.m. to 8:30 a.m., 11 and a half hours. Wow, fantastic. Nap is around noon to 2. If we skip the second nap, oh, I'm sorry. All right, that one is confusing. I'm gonna skip that. Okay, what is the earliest in general that kids are ready to stop napping completely, and how do you make the transition? I would say around 2. It's pretty unusual to see earlier than 2, and 2 is fairly unusual. That's not common. 3 is common. How do you make it? Well, you have a couple of options, which we've discussed, right? You can cap the nap. You can try to reduce, you can push bedtime later. Like sometimes kids aren't quite ready to drop a nap, but they can't fall asleep at bedtime, so we keep the nap for a while, but we move bedtime later. Or you just take the plunge and jump in, like jump in. And it really depends. Your child will tell you which is the right approach for you. Also, what about when daycare's nap is just not working? Okay, this is really common, so listen in, guys. So my daycare has the kids nap from 1 to 2:30, and 2:30 is too late for my child to be sleeping. I don't think they'll wake them up any earlier. A lot of daycares have rules about not waking up sleeping children. That is very common. But what happens is when he sleeps until 2:30, his bedtime is very much later, which I do not want to do. Listen, you might be stuck with this. I'm sorry, it sucks. I know you do not want to be parenting a 2 or 3-year-old at 9:30 at night, and I get that. In most daycares in North America, I don't know about outside of North America, they have the policy of offering nap for kids under certain ages. And if the child falls asleep, they fall asleep. And many have a policy, and oftentimes this is mandated by state or federal guidelines. So it's not even the individual daycare provider's purview. It is simply what it is to not wake a sleeping child. So if your child sleeps till 2:30 and they can't fall asleep until 9:30 at night, then on daycare days, bedtime is 9:30. And that's the way it's gonna be. And that is the nature of daycare. And again, it is not awesome sometimes, but it is sort of outside of your control. So your options are accept a later bedtime when they go to daycare, or get a nanny, which I know is almost impossible. So that is it. That is the welcome to daycare spiel. My almost 4-year-old still naps and bedtime is 9 p.m., but she's not falling asleep until after 10 and wakes at 6:45-ish. So, he really needs the nap. I know it's time to drop it, but if he wakes too early and crashes on the couch when I don't offer the nap, what do we do? So this is the vicious cycle, right? So they're up until 10. So really, I would say your 4-year-old's bedtime is 10 because an hour is too long to be kicking around in bed. So maybe we compromise and we put him down at 9:30, but your bedtime should be close to when you're falling asleep, not an hour. So hour's a bit too long. So we put him down at 9:30, he falls asleep at 10, he wakes up at almost 7, and then he can't make it, so he naps. So it's a vicious cycle, right? So if we stop napping, we have a chance to have our child fall asleep earlier at night, have a longer night, and the longer night is how he'll be able to make it through the day without falling asleep on the couch. So you can continue to have the late night bedtime as long as that suits your purposes. But at some point we'll take the plunge and we'll stop napping and we'll move bedtime earlier, have a longer night, and he'll adjust. Let's see. One person asked, my child dropped to 1 nap and still sometimes wakes, my child dropped nap entirely, but still sometimes wakes up at 4 a.m. Yes, it sucks. So my first thing is this is presumably an older child, let's say 3 or 4. Toddler alarm clock, must have. It is one of the few things that I would encourage everyone with a kid older than 1.5 years to have. Toddler alarm clock. When do we get out of bed? When do we not get out of bed? For older kids who are 3 and 4, this is conversation time. What can you do if you wake up and it's not time to get out of bed yet? What can you do? Are there a couple of board books in the bed? Can they look at pictures? Can they tell themselves stories? Can they sing quietly? Absolutely. Sometimes people wake up at different times because that's how people work. We are not robots. That happens. We're going to wake up early. If I wake up at 4 a.m. and I scream for you and you come get me and we have cuddles and watch videos on the iPad, that's going to lead to, do you think that's going to lead to more or less waking up at 4 in the morning? More. That will lead up to more waking up at 4 in the morning. So we want to remove all the reinforcers of breakfast, time with mom and dad, hanging out on the couch, looking at YouTube videos. And I'm not trying to like poo-poo on iPads. I'm just saying that's often what happens at 4 in the morning because we're all just dead and we're like, ugh. So give them options. What can you do if you wake up early? What happens? What are the rules? Ideally, the rules are calm bodies, quiet voices, stay in bed. That's the rule. So you don't have to sleep. Sometimes you can't sleep. What can you do? Can they look at board books? Sure. If they're in a big kid bed, are there some simple puzzles they can play with in their room? Sure. As long as they're quiet, they are doing their job. If they're not quiet, if they come out of their room, then we have issues. And we have to think about what are our boundaries and natural consequences. What if they do what we ask, which is calm bodies, quiet voices, stay in bed until the light turns green? Let's say it's 6 a.m. We should have a reward system and really encourage that. That's wonderful. But yeah, kids will occasionally wake up super early because people are weird. Okay, we're almost done. I try to keep these to a half an hour. My oldest is now 3.5, turns 4 in January. He goes to daycare 3 days a week. At home, he doesn't nap much. He just has quiet time and he goes to bed pretty easily. On school days, he naps from 1 to 2:30, and we try to keep bedtime the same. He's just not as tired, and we hear him playing with his stuffies for a long time, usually 9:30. Okay, so 45 minutes later than on non-nap days. It doesn't seem like I can prevent him from sleeping at daycare. Thoughts? Well, we kind of covered this, right? So daycare, kids are going to nap or not nap. He's napping on daycare days. So we talked about how it's really hard to move bedtime early, that we are wired to not go to sleep early. It is possible to push bedtime later. So what I would do is say if he's home 4 days a week, then you have your normal 8:45 bedtime on those days. And if he's sleeping at daycare, and that means a later bedtime on daycare days, then it means a later bedtime on daycare days. So if his normal bedtime is 8:45, he falls asleep at 9:30 on daycare days, split the difference and like put him down at 9, 9:10, 9:15. So there's some kicking around, just a little bit less. Is it bad to force nap transitions if it works best for the family? I'm not talking about anything outlandish, but I think once my youngest, who was low sleep needs anyway, gets to be 2.5, we might transition to no nap just to free up our afternoon for other things for older kids. Look, your kiddo will tell you if this is okay. So if you blow off nap because there's something cool you guys want to do and your kid's like a big mess, or we have night problems that emerge like gaps and like problems at bedtime, you'll go, oh, that didn't work so great. But if you blow off nap to do something great with your family and your kid's happy and everybody has a wonderful time and bedtime is not a problem and night sleep is unaffected, great, great. So it really depends. There are some kids who are done napping at 2.5 all on their own. And if they're low sleep needs to begin with, that's probably where you're headed. My 5.5-year-old, wow, big kid, is acting like he needs to drop a nap. Except he did a year ago, psych. He's been going to bed later and later and rising early. 3 months ago, he was sleeping 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. Now, I regularly find him awake at 9:30 or even 10, and he's playing in his room at 6, maybe earlier, and we have no idea. So if he goes to bed at 10 and he's up at 6, that's 8 hours, which is a little on the short side for 5.5. Not like out of the realm of normal, but a little short. So one thing, so a kid who's almost 6 is to talk to him. What's up, bud? It's conversation time. The other thing, and I know no one ever likes to talk about this, but I think it's really important that we acknowledge that COVID fires all up the east, the West Coast, global turmoil, political turmoil. It is a very stressful time. And that is going to inform our parenting and our emotional state. So we are impacted by these things. You cannot deny this, that we are impacted by these things. And there is an actual documented phenomenon called emotional contagion, which means emotions are contagious. So I see a lot of parents like desperately trying to act like everything's totally fine and normal. And we're gonna put on our brave face for our kids and everything's great. But our kids know. We cannot fool kids. Our feelings are contagious, and they are there regardless of how much we are trying to smile and stiff upper lip our way through things. So I actually think it's really important to name it to tame it, and to acknowledge the feeling and name the feeling, to say, it is hard for me that we can't see Grandma and Grandpa right now. Sometimes I feel weird wearing masks. It's not normal, and it's a weirdness for me. And sometimes I feel weird about it. It's okay to label these things. I miss hanging out with our friends. I am sad that we can't go to the movies. Like, label these things and acknowledge the oddness or the uncomfortableness or whatever it is that you're feeling in your individual circumstance. I've talked to many families on the West Coast right now who are struggling, they can't go outside. And it's okay to say, I am sad that we cannot go to the park. I don't like this. It's not good. And give your children the opportunity, especially at 5.5, to express their feelings. Like, hey buddy, I see you're having a hard time at bedtime. You want to talk about it? You know, why is he having a hard time? Could be a lot of things. He could have his own anxiety. Is he starting kindergarten? This is a huge transition. Was he looking forward to kindergarten and now it's remote and he's talking on Zoom to his kindergarten teacher? That's a big transition. So, you know, talk about it. Is he having a hard time shutting his brain off at bedtime? There's a lot going on to think about, and kids start to have that same thing where their brains are spinning. Then we start looking at, you know, honestly, like, there's mindfulness apps for kids. Headspace is great. We talk about belly breathing. There's a really great podcast, which is basically like meditative stories for kids to listen to at bedtime. They're super, super boring, but they're trying to get you to settle down and do some positive visualization and try to unhook our brains from whatever it is that we're chunking on. So at 5.5, so with younger kids, you know, we've got things about schedules and apps. At 5.5, these are conversations. And obviously I think a child who basically is dropping like 2 to 3 hours of sleep a day, right? That's a huge shift. That's more than we would expect to see just from naturally outgrowing sleep. I would get curious and do a little experimentation there and say, you know, is he stressed? Is he picking up on our feelings? Again, despite our best efforts to put on our brave upper lip, and talk to him and figure out how can we help him turn off his brain and relax his body and settle down into sleep. And at 5.5, there's some tools that we can look at that we can't look at for younger kids. So yeah, I would look into those things. So thank you so much for checking in today. I really appreciate all the great questions. I love doing these little half-an-hour lives. I try to keep them really short and brief. And we'll pick another topic next week and keep the questions coming. Talk to you soon.